Hello ladies and gentlemen, ShayLe Hildebrand here, welcoming you into 2019, and I am so excited to finally be in front of you again and offer you another cattle market news tip sheet. With Christmas falling at the beginning of the week and the new year being at the beginning of the week, this is your first full week of January in 2019. So without further ado, I want to offer you a cattle market news tip sheet. So with that being said, folks, let's dive on in and talk business. But before we get too carried away, I want to say thank you. Thank you for watching these videos. Thank you for sharing them. Thank you for your positive comments, and I am so excited to offer you these videos again in 2019. So if you have anything that you'd like to specifically see, go ahead and message me on Facebook or comment on the video. I love all your responses. So let's dive on in and talk all things cattle. So with this being the first full week of 2019, the market still has a lot to establish. Last week, fat cattle sold for good money, steady money. Late in the week, live cattle sold for $1.23 and dressed cattle sold for $1.95. The kicker of the new year has kind of been the weather. As many of you know who have been in the West or the Midwest, there's been a lot of moisture and then kind of followed up with some fluctuations in temperature, whether you're kind of getting those below freezing and negative wind chills and whatnot, and then you're followed up by 45-degree weather. That really affects the feedlots, because on one second you're dealing with cold and then the next second you're dealing with slop. So that's kind of been the drawback of 2019, is that it doesn't necessarily affect fat cattle unless they're buying them live, because you don't want the cattle to have tags on them, but it does affect feeder cows, because whenever feeders are tromping through mud, they're not ambitious to get more cattle in their lot. So I pray that those folks either dry out, or maybe more realistically just get hard and frozen so those cattle aren't weathering through the slop. But let's dive in and talk calf prices. So for the new year of 2019, the market really hasn't established itself yet, so we're just going to start with groundbreaking prices for 2019. So let's start out the top of the week in South Dakota. In South Dakota this last week, your 575 weight sold for $1.67, your 6 1/4 weight sold for $1.71, and your 765 pound steer calves, they sold for $1.32. In Nebraska this last week, your 543 pound steer calves sold for $1.87, your 630 weight sold for $1.67, and your 750 pound steer calves, they sold for $1.55. Jumping over to Kansas, your 604 weight sold for $1.63, your 686 pound steer calves, they sold for $1.49, and your 772 pound steer calves, well, they sold for $1.46. Going over to Oklahoma, your 627 weight sold for $1.43, your 713 pound steer calves, they sold for $1.42, and your 783 pound steer calves, well, they sold for $1.43. Dropping south into Missouri, your 571 pound steer calves, they sold for $1.56. Your 632 pound steer calves, they sold for $1.51, and your 690 weights, they sold for $1.42. And to wrap up the calf prices, let's drop on over to Tennessee. In Tennessee this last week, your 508 pound steer calves, they sold for $1.32. Your 670 pound steer calves sold for $1.36, and your 700 weights, they sold for $1.13. But I kind of want to leave you this week with a reminder of kind of what to have on your calendar, or things that you could be thinking of. If you're interested in watching some sales, today and tomorrow in Billings, Montana is the Diamond Ring. They're going to be selling right at 68,500 head of cattle right through the markets in Billings, Montana. It's going to be a great showing of what 19 is going to bring and kind of where the markets are going to take off and spring from. So I hope that you'll take the time to watch those markets today and tomorrow at the Diamond Ring in Billings. And then I want to tell you about the Montana's Next Generation Conference held January 25th and 26th in Shelby, Montana. Early registration is offered right now with an early bird pricing, so I really want to stress that point, folks. This is a great opportunity to learn about crops, livestock, finances, and so much more. So we'll go ahead and talk more of that in detail later when the week is coming. But if you want to find more information, go ahead and look them up online at www.mtnexgen.com, and you can also find them on Facebook. So folks, that's Montana Next Generation Conference, January 25th and 26th. So with that, folks, that's a wrap for your cattle market news tip sheet for the first week in January. Now, I know that some of you might have heard those prices and said, well, geez, that's not exactly what we expected for 2019, but always remember, the first week of January is just kind of that time for the market to play itself out and figure out where it's going to go. The second half of January is where we pick up steam, so stay tuned, because we'll be there and talking about it the second week of January too. Ladies and gentlemen, ShayLe Hildebrand signing off with your cattle market news tip sheet.